Fingerprints on every page. One day in 1988, I looked up from my desk and glanced at this paper which was hanging on the wall of my office. It was an enlargement that I had written out by hand and glued together. I thought the original might be a document or copy of a document that was predicted long ago in the Bible. And it was on the wall to look at because I could never figure it out. I couldn't read it. So once in a while, I would glance at it and just wonder. Finally, one late afternoon, I glanced at it again. But this time, I saw something I'd never noticed before. And I don't think anyone else had ever noticed it. It was a certain repetition or pattern in the characters. Maybe one of those fingerprints that would reveal where it came from. Let me explain. The Book of Mormon on page 105 gives us a prophecy about Joseph Smith and a piece of paper. It states that Joseph would receive a sealed book from God. And the Bible also tells us about this. In the Hebrew Bible, he is called Lo Yoda Sefer, he who does not know books. Well, Joseph would receive a certain sealed book, and the Bible tells us, in the Book of Mormon, that some of the words of the book would be taken to a learned man who knew books, so that learned man might try to read the words. We know the learned man turned out to be Professor Charles Anthon of Columbia University, Columbia College at that time, in New York City. We also know that the man who would carry that piece of paper with the words on it was a farmer named Martin Harris. We even know what Martin would say to the professor and what the professor would say back to Martin. But neither the Bible nor the Book of Mormon tell us what would happen to that paper document after Martin showed it to the professor. So what happened to the paper? Where'd it go? And this is what is so interesting. You see, there is a very old piece of paper that may be the Caractors Document, or a copy of it. Okay, that's the background. Let's talk about the rest of the story. One Monday in February 1884, President George Buchanan of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints knocked on the door of a Mr. David Whitmer in Richmond, Virginia. And the two men had a very pleasant, friendly visit. You see, when Mr. Whitmer was young, he had been close to Joseph Smith. In fact, Joseph had stayed in the Whitmer family home while he was translating some of the Book of Mormon. And Mr. Whitmer still possessed some precious things that had belonged to Joseph. He even had the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. The printer's manuscript is the handwritten copy of the Book of Mormon, which the printer used to set the type for the book. Now, to the point. He also had what he called the Caractors Document, that piece of paper that Martin had taken to Professor Anthon in 1830. Now, in President Cannon's diary, he recorded that both he and Mr. Whitmer were absolutely certain that the piece of paper they were handling was the original document which Martin had carried to show Professor Anthon. And on it was written some of the text of the Book of Mormon in the original words or characters of the ancient and forgotten language. Mr. Whitmer kept the document that day, and it stayed in his family for 2 more generations. But in 1902, his grandson sold the Caractors Document to a church now called the Community of Christ, and that church has held and meticulously cared for the Caractors Document all this time. Once I wrote a book about the document and was given permission by the community of Christ to use their photographic images of the document in my book. And recently, researchers have worked to translate the document either by inspiration or by their knowledge of ancient languages. Now, I confess, I don't have the inspiration or ability to do that. But still, I've speculated about that piece of paper most of my life. Over the years, I've also researched some other things. For example, I've studied an ancient form of Hebrew poetry that has been found in various parts of the Bible. It's an unusual poetry that had accidentally been kind of covered over or lost in the modern translations of the Bible. It isn't the repetition of sounds, words, or rhyming, like our Western poetry. It's a repetition of words or the meaning of words. This example is just one type of that ancient form. You can see how there are words in the first line that are repeated in the last line. They're parallel to each other. And then words in the second line are repeated in the second from the last line, and so on through the whole poem. Over the years, along with many other people, I've tried to discover the Hebrew parallel poems throughout the Book of Mormon. And this is the result of that study. It's called The God-Inspired Language of the Book of Mormon. And this was printed in 1988. This was the first time that the entire Book of Mormon was published and copyrighted in a parallel format. After that study came the same kind of study of the Bible. And this is part of that study. It's the entire Bible, Old and New Testaments, put in the parallel form, the stitchographic form that allows you to see the parallelism and the details of the ancient document. Well, it didn't end there. I also studied the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible and studied the parallelism that is there in that book. So you can imagine that by that time I was used to noticing parallel phrases in ancient writings. So that day in the office, when I glanced up one more time at that paper on the wall, I suddenly noticed something peculiar. It was a symbol which was written in the last line and then repeated again a few symbols later. Then another symbol was written close to the first, and it was repeated in reverse order in the other phrase. Looking further, there were more symbols given and repeated in the same reverse order. This particular parallel form, reverse parallel or chiasmus, was not generally known or recognized in the Bible at the time it was translated into English. But when it is translated literally into English, it's found from Genesis to the book of Revelation. And apparently no one was aware that it is in the Book of Mormon until the late 1960s. Now we know it's found from the beginning to the end of the book. And here in the Characters Document, the whole text is made up of two reverse parallel poems, one after the other. And when you place the text in a parallel format, the first parallelism appears to have 10 phrases, which are then repeated in reverse order. The second poem also has 10 phrases, which are then repeated in reverse order, with the last 5 missing where the page is cut off. We assume they were written on the next page of the text. When the document is formatted in this way, you can clearly see the repetition of the lines. But how can we be sure that someone intentionally wrote this parallel poem? Or did it all just come together as a coincidence? And that's the issue. Is this an intricate parallel poem, or is it just a collection of jumbled characters? It's really the same old question of intelligent design or accidental incident. After all the years, we decided to submit the question for analysis to two separate experts in two completely separate parts of the world. Wouldn't it be interesting to have them quantify the probability that these parallel lines occurred randomly, accidentally, by chance? Dr. Milos Kovacevic is a well-qualified statistician and data scientist in Milan, Italy. He's not a Latter-day Saint nor a student of the Book of Mormon. He carries no bias or preference in the outcome. We employed him to research the problem and to mathematically calculate the probability of this exact repetition being an accidental occurrence. His evaluation states that the probability of this occurrence happening by accident was 1 in 100 billion billion. The other expert is Dr. Janu Subramanian. He is a statistician and data expert in New York City, in the very city where Dr. Anthon first examined the paper so long ago. He also is not a Latter-day Saint nor a student of the Book of Mormon. He completed his research on the document and declared the probability of this order of characters in this document being a chance occurrence is 1 in 1 septillion. What is that? A septillion is 1 followed by 24 zeros. 1 in a septillion. He also commented, that's near zero. Now, I'm not saying that their analysis proves the authenticity of the document or the Book of Mormon. There's an extremely small chance that it is all an accident. And it was President Dallin Oaks who said, "It is our position that secular evidence can neither prove or disprove the authenticity of the Book of Mormon." So the intent here is not to prove it. The intent is merely to demonstrate one thing. The Book of Mormon deserves serious consideration. It deserves our time to find out. And the only way to know with certainty, is to spiritually experiment upon the words, read it, ponder it, ask God for ourselves if it is true. His ways are not our ways. His ways are not probabilities or possibilities. His way is this: if any of ye lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. I've done that, and that is why I join my voice with millions of others to say, I know it's true.